When you think of Super Mario Sunshine's pre-release, you'd probably think of Space World 2001, or perhaps some of Sunshine's cut content may come to mind, such as the Trampling Stew, Flying Piranha Buns, or Test 11.SCS. All that stuff is cool and all, but most of it can only be experienced through modding the game. But what if I told you there was a playable pre-release build of the game? Believe it or not, Super Mario Sunshine had playable demo discs that released before the final game did. Now, don't get too excited because the earliest of these demo discs released not a month before Super Mario Sunshine's first release in Japan. So while there are some differences, they're unfortunately fairly minor. Regardless, there are some interesting oddities within these demo discs, especially when we start to poke and prod at the game in the typical Sunshine Experiments fashion. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and give some background to what exactly these Sunshine demo discs are and what they contain. So the first notable thing about any of the released Sunshine demos is that they weren't technically released to the public, but instead they were released for shoppers to sample at kiosks. I think stores like Target and GameStop still do that, right? Where there's a kiosk for you to try demos of upcoming/released video games on. Either way, the Sunshine demo discs weren't really ever meant to get into the hands of the public, yet despite that, they did. Now, something specific to mention about many of these demo discs is that most of them weren't specifically just demos for Super Mario Sunshine. They had other games and promo videos on them. That said, there actually is one demo disc that is completely focused on Super Mario Sunshine, which is titled Mario Special Disc July 2002. Now, Mario Special Disc July 2002 was a Japan exclusive demo disc, and that is going to be our demo disc of focus for today, as it contains the earliest build of the game. The demo disc contains 4 video promos of Sunshine along with the playable demo. And while the promo videos are interesting, they're not the focus of today's video, so I'm not going to discuss them, but we may revisit them sometime in the future. Moving on to the playable demo itself, we're greeted with a very familiar intro cutscene followed by an also very familiar title screen. And once we press A on that very familiar title screen, the demo suddenly takes a drastic turn from familiarity. Instead of the camera panning down to Mario on the file select, like normal, we get taken to a menu with 6 level selections, which have titles such as Waiting at the Windmill, Muddy Port Mystery, or my personal favorite, Pesky Pest and the Shaky Mirror. But it's behind these amazingly alliterated aliases for the levels that we can spot some interesting things, such as this cloud, which doesn't actually appear in Bianco Hills, this boat, which doesn't appear in Rico Harbor, this coral reef, which is much further left than the coral reef is in the release version of Gelato Beach, this awning coming off of the Sandbird Egg Tower thing, which isn't in the release version of Gelato Beach, but actually does appear in some of the low poly models of Gelato Beach, and finally, this picture for Junior's Playing Room, which appears to show a super early version of the Noki Bay 6 shell secret, which is especially weird because pressing A on it actually loads you into the Bianco Hills 3 secret. Don't know the logic or reasoning behind that choice. And while these differences in the background images are pretty cool to spot, once we actually load into any of these levels, there's pretty much nothing different at all. Yeah, for some reason these images reflect earlier versions of the level on the version of the level you actually load into. In fact, most differences between the demo disc and the release version of the game have to do with more general mechanics and behaviors rather than the specific differences within the levels. For instance, regular blue coins actually make different sounds upon being collected. Here's a comparison. And something else you might have noticed is that on the demo disc, blue coins don't pause your game upon being collected. Who knew the demo could be better than the release in some aspects? One of the biggest differences that you as a viewer may or not be able to notice is the camera. And what's different about the camera? Well, it's bad. Real bad. As in, it's absolutely glued to Mario's back. You basically have to wrestle for control of the camera anytime you want control over the camera and are moving Mario at the same time. To try and make this clear, here's a comparison of me holding left on the control stick between the demo and the release. Yeah, it's not great. Finally, one last difference before we get into some of the modding content. Mario can grab ledges he otherwise wouldn't be able to in the release of the game. Here's another comparison to show you exactly what I mean. Again, this is only achievable in the demo versions of the game because Mario wouldn't even be able to grab that ledge in the first place on the release versions of the game. But that's enough talking about easy to find differences. Let's get into some of the more interesting stuff. So this was supposed to be the part of the video where I tell you about some major discovery I made, or show you guys a bunch of small but interesting things, but to be honest, there really hasn't been much. Unfortunately, there really was only one real interesting thing I found through modding, but before we get into that, I want to show you what exactly I have been modding for this video. Since only a few levels exist within the demo version of Sunshine, my priority was to mod in and load levels that don't exist within the demo. So for instance, I would take a level from the release version of the game, let's say Serena Beach Episode 1. I'd then take that level, then patch it into the demo version so I could load into it. The goal with this method of modding was to see if anything behaved differently, such as Phantom Manta, which acts pretty much, if not exactly the same as it does in the release versions of the game. I tried this with a multitude of levels, and if I found a difference, it was usually very small. For instance, the red coin buttons actually make a different sound when activated. Here's a comparison. Or this slot machine makes a different sound when ground pounded. Here's another comparison. And I could go on about subtle differences in sounds, or visual differences, or crashes, but it's really just not that interesting. Instead, I'll just link in the description a spreadsheet that has all the small differences that I've documented so far, if you're really that curious. That said, let's get into the biggest, but still not that big, thing I found, which has to do with the big boy himself, Bowser. So once loading into the boss fight against Bowser, there's pretty clearly a few weird things going on here, all relating to the hot tub water. For one, Bowser Jr. and Princess Peach are for some reason floating way higher than they should be. Despite that, they still seem to behave the same as they usually do, just higher up. They both bib and bob around, and Bowser Jr. shoots his bullet bills that do a pretty comical nosedive before they start chasing Mario around. And of course, the water itself also appears to not be there, but trust me, it actually is. Not only does it still damage Mario in its usual ways, but it actually does appear once we view it from the right angle. At first, I thought the combination of Junior and Peach floating in the sky with only being able to see the water from a considerably higher angle meant that maybe the bathtub was originally placed higher up in the level, but after placing the bathtub in a higher position with the level editor, both Peach and Junior were still floating above everything else. And of course, the water also still only appeared when viewing it from a much higher angle. So that leaves a pretty obvious answer to why everything is out of place, at least in my opinion, which is that the final boss fight was just unfinished at this point, which, just saying, would also lend credence to my theory about why Bowser is so big in Sunshine. Go ahead and give that video a watch if you haven't already. And also, one final observation, it to me seems like the graphical effects for the water in the hot tub are different. It almost seems less bubbly, if that makes sense. Otherwise, really not much else to say about that. Okay, so as I stated earlier, this is unfortunately everything I have to show for my couple of weeks of research on the SMS demo disc. Of course, I actually had to figure out on my own how to actually mod the version of the game, since it's not as easy as modding the release versions of the game for various reasons, but still, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. I was hoping to find more, but what can you do? Either way, I still feel obligated to share my findings to the community, so I'm doing just that. And on top of that, I'm going to share my methods of how I modded the demo disc, along with a tool that I myself developed to help with modding. So if you're interested in trying to find something for yourself, I'll link an unlisted tutorial video in the description. And of course, I'd like to thank everybody, not just for watching, but for the crazy amount of support my channel has been getting lately. Like seriously, it's pretty crazy to me that one day I logged onto my YouTube account and noticed I'd gotten 5 subs since the day before. While I don't want to dictate my mood, success, or self-worth on numbers like that, that type of stuff just makes my day. Or seeing that the Beta Delfino Plaza video sometimes gets 100 views in a single day, that's mind-blowing. And of course, as I said in the last video, all the nice comments you guys have been leaving me are really motivating. From the bottom of my heart, thank you guys. Anyways, I've been Angry Max, and later.